In the dim light of a crumbling world, Winston Smith walks like a ghost, drained, translucent, a man worn thin by the weight of lies. The city breathes hate, and the party orchestrates its madness with terrifying precision. But beneath the noise, a secret pulses, a forbidden book, a sliver of truth. What if history could be rewritten not by the powerful, but by those who dare to remember? In this chapter, we follow Winston through the chaos of Hate Week, into the heart of propaganda, and toward a dangerous awakening. In the numbing silence that followed days of frenzied labor, Winston Smith moved like a ghost through the streets, his body drained of substance, his mind dulled by exhaustion. 90 hours of work in 5 days had left him feeling translucent, gelatinous, not merely tired, but as though his very being had been thinned by the grind of servitude. As he trudged toward Mr. Charrington's shop, a battered briefcase bounced against his leg, its weight a quiet reminder of the dangerous secret it held, the forbidden book he had acquired but not yet dared to open. The city around him bore the remnants of Hate Week, an orchestrated crescendo of madness. Processions, banners, amplified speeches, and the hypnotic pounding of military boots had stirred the populace into a frenzy of nationalist ecstasy and blind hatred. In that carefully constructed theater of fury, a stunning pivot occurred. Oceania's enemy was no longer Eurasia, but East Asia. With terrifying ease, the crowd accepted the contradiction. The orator on the platform, mid-sentence without pause, replaced names and allegiances. The masses, driven by Pavlovian rage, ripped down posters and banners bearing the old enemy's face. Within minutes, the lie had become truth. Oceania had always been at war with East Asia. For Winston, the horror was not just in the public's obedience, but in the party's ability to rewrite the past in real time, without hesitation, without acknowledgement, without error. The power was not merely to control information, but to manipulate perception at its root, and he was about to become a part of it. When the demonstration ended, Winston, like the entire staff of the Ministry of Truth, returned immediately to work. There was no formal order. There didn't need to be. The reality shift had triggered a silent command. Every book, newspaper, photograph, and record referring to the former enemy had to be altered. The war with Eurasia had never happened. Reports had to be rewritten. Historical documents had to be destroyed. It was a deluge of lies manufactured with surgical precision and fanatical devotion. The records department transformed into a war zone of its own. Workers slept on mattresses in the hallways, subsisting on dry sandwiches and victory coffee. Speak rights clicked endlessly. Cylinders of paper rained from the tubes. Winston, bleary-eyed, typed lie after lie, not simply replacing names, but reconstructing entire geopolitical landscapes to match the party's new narrative. He understood the madness of it, yet felt a compulsive need to do it perfectly. Truth had been stripped of meaning. The ideal was not to correct the past, but to obliterate it completely. On the 6th day, the paper flow ceased. A collective breath passed through the building, silent but electric. The task was complete. History had been rewritten again, flawlessly. No evidence remained that Eurasia had ever been the enemy. For the party, reality itself was malleable. Truth was not objective. It was whatever Big Brother declared it to be. Finally relieved from duty, Winston returned to the rented room above Mr. Charrington's shop. Despite his exhaustion, he felt strangely alert. He bathed, prepared coffee, and waited for Julia. Then, at last, he opened the briefcase and took out the book, the black, unmarked volume by Emmanuel Goldstein, The Theory and Practice of Oligarchical Collectivism. Holding the pages worn with use, he knew this was not merely an intellectual artifact. It was a lifeline, a window into forbidden knowledge. He began reading. The first chapter, Ignorance is Strength, offered a history of power and class. Since the dawn of civilization, human societies had always been structured into 3 groups: the high, the middle, and the low. These classes, though named differently across eras, followed a consistent pattern. The high sought to retain power. The middle aimed to overthrow the high. The low, exploited and exhausted, rarely emerged as a force on their own, except when manipulated by the middle. Revolutions occurred. Empires rose and fell, but the structure remained. The names of the rulers changed, but the oppression endured. True equality, Goldstein argued, had never been achieved. Winston paused, overwhelmed by the clarity of what he was reading. The book was not merely revealing history, it was explaining his world, articulating the inexpressible. For the first time, he was reading with complete safety and solitude. No telescreen, no surveillance, just the quiet rustle of pages and the faint summer breeze from the open window. Driven by urgency, he skipped ahead to Chapter 3, War is Peace. Here, the book outlined the geopolitical structure of the world. It described the three superstates, Oceania, Eurasia, and Eastasia, permanently at war, though not to win but to maintain internal control. War was no longer a tool of conquest. It was a system of equilibrium. The disputed territories between the superstates, rich in cheap labor, changed hands frequently, but the central nations themselves remained untouched. The wars were manufactured to burn surplus resources, prevent economic prosperity, and keep the masses in a state of fear and deprivation. What struck Winston most was the idea that modern war had no external purpose. Its goal was not victory, but the perpetuation of a controlled, hierarchical society. Through war, the party ensured that the population remained poor, anxious, and dependent. Even technological advancement, which once promised human liberation, had been reconfigured to serve repression. New inventions were designed not to elevate living standards, but to refine methods of surveillance and destruction. Goldstein's argument was chilling. The party did not fear war. It feared peace. Peace would bring prosperity. Prosperity would bring education. And education would awaken the masses to injustice. In this equation, ignorance was not a flaw. It was essential. Winston's mind reeled. The book confirmed what he had long suspected. The party's power rested not on brute force alone, but on the careful construction of illusion. Doublethink, the ability to hold two contradictory beliefs and accept both, was not a mental glitch. It was a weapon, meticulously cultivated. The party's greatest triumph was not merely rewriting history, it was making people forget that history had ever existed. As he turned pages, Goldstein laid bare the moral rot of Oceania. Even the elite, those who lived in relative luxury, were prisoners of doctrine. They too believed the lies, because belief was the only way to survive. The inner party's hold on power was not just political, it was spiritual. It controlled not only what people did, but what they thought, what they remembered, and even what they could imagine. In this way, the book dismantled the very concept of objective truth. What remained was a vacuum, filled with fear and submission. A society where 2 + 2 could equal 5, not because it was true, but because the party said it was. Winston felt an aching mixture of relief and despair. The truth had finally been named, but it offered no immediate solution. Still, knowledge, he believed, was the beginning of rebellion. It was the first crack in the armor of totalitarianism. And in the stillness of that room, as the voice of the clock ticked like a whisper, Winston clung to that belief. As Julia arrived and settled beside him, he began reading the book aloud. She listened with closed eyes, half asleep, yet accepting. The words wrapped around them like a cocoon. For now, they were safe. But the war, real or fabricated, raged on outside, a constant drumbeat keeping the rest of the world blind, obedient, and chained. And within those pages, Winston had found not just answers, but questions. Dangerous questions. Questions that would not go away. In this harrowing yet intimate section of 1984, George Orwell leads the reader into a world where exhaustion is not merely physical, but existential. The narrative begins with Winston Smith, the protagonist, moving like a shadow of himself after enduring 90 relentless hours of party-driven labor. His body, described with a fragile metaphor, gelatinous with fatigue, is not just weak, but almost transparent. As Orwell writes, his body seemed to have not only the weakness of a jelly, but its translucency. The reader is immediately drawn into a state of empathy. This is not the ordinary tiredness of a working man. It is the symbolic depletion of individuality, of substance, of presence. Through Winston's bodily collapse, Orwell paints the consequences of ideological control, of being emptied of its core, surviving only through habitual motion. The image of Winston walking through the dingy street with a heavy briefcase he has not yet opened is laden with symbolic weight. Inside that briefcase lies a book, a forbidden truth, yet he has delayed confronting it. This tension between knowledge and avoidance reflects the internal struggle many face in oppressive systems. The fear of knowing, the burden of awareness. Truth is not just hidden by the regime, it is also voluntarily deferred by those too weary to bear its consequences. The description of Hate Week is one of Orwell's most masterful depictions of mass manipulation. The populace is whipped into a frenzy through banners, drums, speeches, and orchestrated outrage until a sudden reversal occurs. The enemy, once Eurasia, is now East Asia, and astonishingly, no one objects. Orwell writes, "Merely it became known, with extreme suddenness and everywhere at once, that Eastasia and not Eurasia was the enemy." This seamless transformation of reality, without acknowledgement of contradiction, is perhaps the most chilling element of the passage. It speaks to the terrifying plasticity of collective memory when it is no longer grounded in shared truth, but in centralized narrative. The orator continues his speech, barely adjusting tone or syntax, now casting Eastasia as the villain. In a single moment, the fury of the masses is redirected, unquestioned and unexamined. Orwell's scene reminds us that when truth is no longer objective, when facts are subordinated to convenience or fear, people become susceptible to being led not by reason, but by ritual. Winston's return to the ministry of truth is not a choice, but a compulsion. Everyone knows their task: erase, rewrite, correct. The world must now reflect the new reality. Oceania has always been at war with East Asia. There is no command, no explanation. The very nature of their work is to destroy history and make the lie real. The most poignant aspect of this section is not the mechanical alteration of records, but the psychological participation. Winston, though aware of the falsehood, commits himself to the forgery with the same fervor as everyone else. Orwell writes, "He was as anxious as anyone else in the department that the forgery should be perfect." This paradox of lying with sincerity speaks to the human need for internal consistency, even under tyranny. In a society where objective truth is criminal, people adapt not only their words, but their beliefs in order to survive. The reader is confronted with a difficult truth. Even the most aware individuals may become complicit in falsehood when the cost of resistance is too high and the rewards of conformity too essential. As the paper cylinders stop and the records are fully corrected, a quiet pride fills the air. A mighty deed which could never be mentioned has been accomplished. What is disturbing here is not only the scale of the lie, but its total erasure of evidence. Orwell chillingly notes, "It was now impossible for any human being to prove by documentary evidence that the war with Eurasia had ever happened." This passage is a profound warning about the dangers of historical revisionism. When the past can be erased, the future becomes uncertain. Identity, morality, and knowledge are all contingent upon memory. And when memory is controlled, so too is the human spirit. In one of the most telling symbolic moments, Winston brings the book back to his private room, untouched during all the days of erasure. Its presence is a quiet rebellion. Its unread pages are potential, waiting. That he dares to open it only after the frenzy is over shows the tension between fear and courage, fatigue and resolve. Inside the book, The Theory and Practice of Oligarchical Collectivism, Winston finds confirmation of his suspicions. The structure of society, divided into the high, middle, and low, has persisted throughout history. Revolutions merely rearrange the faces at the top. The masses, the low, remain in servitude, crushed under the weight of labor and propaganda. The insight that stands out is this: the essential structure of society has never altered. This idea, repeated like a mantra, forces the reader to confront the disillusionment of progress narratives. The myth that history arcs toward justice is debunked. Progress, if it happens at all, is surface level. Through Goldstein's words, Orwell reveals that without structural change, without the redistribution of both power and consciousness, no revolution can liberate. One of the most powerful themes in this section is the deliberate construction of ignorance. War in this world is no longer waged for conquest, but for control. The goal is not victory, but permanence, perpetual tension that justifies surveillance, hierarchy, and deprivation. The slogan, "War is peace," is no paradox. It is policy. Even science is weaponized. Innovations are pursued only if they serve domination. More precise bombs, more efficient ways to erase dissent. Orwell's fictional party does not suppress science by banning it, it redirects it. Curiosity is not killed, it is shackled. In a particularly sobering moment, the book notes that real technological progress has stopped. The world is regressing, not because it won, but because true knowledge is dangerous. A literate, questioning, comfortable populace is a threat to tyranny. The concept of doublethink, holding two contradictory beliefs at once, is not just an intellectual exercise. It is a psychological wound. Those who master it live with constant inner tension. They must know and not know, believe and disbelieve. As Orwell describes, even inner-party members often realize the war is fabricated, yet they believe in it completely. This spiritual dissonance is the final tool of the regime. People are not controlled through violence alone, but through internal fracture. They are made to love the party and fear it, to find safety in its lies and danger in the truth. In that way, Orwell suggests, the ultimate prison is not physical, it is mental. It is the inability to trust one's own perception. From this haunting passage, several universal lessons emerge. First, truth requires effort. As Winston learns, recognizing the truth is only the beginning. Confronting it, living by it, and preserving it in hostile systems takes tremendous courage. Second, propaganda thrives where memory fails. When societies stop preserving history or rewrite it for convenience, they open themselves to cycles of control and abuse. Third, mass hysteria is orchestrated. Public emotions, especially hatred and fear, can be engineered through repetition, spectacle, and distraction. Awareness is the antidote. Fourth, critical thought is a form of resistance. Even in silence, the ability to question, to remember, and to feel discomfort with contradiction is a quiet form of rebellion. Fifth, ignorance is not strength, it is submission. Orwell's world teaches us that being uninformed or willfully ignorant does not protect us. It makes us instruments of our own oppression. And sixth, language shapes reality. The words we use, and the ones we are allowed to use, define what we can think. Protecting language is protecting thought itself. As Winston sits alone, reading in rare stillness, the reader too is invited to pause. To consider the world not as it is presented, but as it might truly be. To ask hard questions. To guard memory. And to never surrender the right to think, even when it is painful. This section is not just literature, it is a mirror. And what it reflects, we must decide whether to confront or deny. This moment of quiet reflection with Winston seated by the open window and the faint sounds of children playing in the distance is not just a pause in action, it is a window into something deeper. In a world dominated by noise, propaganda, and manipulation, silence becomes sacred. Orwell allows Winston and us a moment to breathe, to remember what it feels like to be human. The sweet summer air played against his cheek. It is a rare and almost sacred intimacy with reality, unfiltered and unprogrammed. In this stillness, Orwell emphasizes the spiritual cost of constant surveillance, that even a gentle breeze on the skin becomes a form of rediscovery. When Winston returns to the book, this time to chapter 3, War is Peace, he dives deeper into the ideological machinery of the party. The passage shifts from a deeply personal experience to a systemic analysis of power. Orwell, through Goldstein's voice, outlines the terrifying simplicity behind perpetual warfare, not as a means of conquest, but as a mechanism of control. War is no longer about victory or loss. It is about maintaining the very structure of a hierarchical society. What emerges here is one of the most profound philosophical insights in the entire novel: the realization that progress can become a threat to tyranny. Orwell writes that the rise of technology should have eliminated hunger, labor, inequality. But if the machine can lift people out of suffering, then it also threatens to equalize them, and thus destroy the distinctions of power. The party solves this problem not by stopping progress, but by hijacking it. Science continues, but only in service of repression. More efficient weapons, more intrusive surveillance, more precise methods of torture. Knowledge that could liberate is perverted to imprison. The phrase "war is peace" is no longer ironic, it is chillingly literal. Constant war consumes excess resources, ensuring that no one becomes too comfortable. Poverty, scarcity, fear, these are not byproducts of war. They are the goals. And when people are exhausted, starved, and afraid, they do not rebel, they obey. Winston's reading of this chapter is interrupted only when Julia arrives, dropping her tool bag and wrapping herself around him. It's a human moment amidst inhuman circumstances. Yet even here, the contrast between their connection and the mechanical brutality of the world around them underscores the fragility of intimacy under tyranny. Julia does not share Winston's urgency to read or understand the book. "You read it," she says. "Read it aloud. That's the best way." This seemingly casual comment captures the disparity between their two forms of rebellion. Winston seeks truth in thought. Julia finds meaning in moments. Orwell suggests that even love, when stripped of curiosity, when separated from a shared pursuit of truth, can be dulled by oppression. Julia, for all her defiance, has resigned herself to a world where rebellion lives only in secret moments. Winston, on the other hand, still yearns for something larger: understanding, change, liberation. He does not just want to survive, he wants to remember, to think, to know. What makes this section of the book so haunting is how Orwell methodically reveals that totalitarianism does not merely demand obedience, it demands complicity in forgetting. Oceania had always been at war with East Asia. That single sentence, "wipe it and accept it," encapsulates the entire tragedy of a mind that has surrendered its ability to anchor itself in reality. The past is not just rewritten, it is erased. The present is not just manipulated, it is manufactured. And the future, it becomes a loop, a repetition of control, surveillance, fear. Perhaps the most chilling lesson from this passage is that the enemy of totalitarianism is not resistance, it is memory. To remember is to challenge the official story, to compare what was with what is. To retain even a private truth is to plant a seed of revolution. Orwell does not end this section with a grand act of defiance. but with something more intimate. A man reading a forbidden book, a woman falling asleep, the sound of boots below, and a song floating through the courtyard. It is a portrait of tenderness within terror. And that perhaps is the last and most urgent lesson Orwell gives us here, that even under total control, the soul may still flicker. That moments of connection, of insight, of stillness are not only possible, they are necessary. In a world that seeks to dominate every thought, every memory, every word, the quiet act of reading, of loving, of remembering becomes the most radical act of all. What will we do with that lesson? Will we guard our memories, protect our language, and stay vigilant to the slow erosion of reality? Will we read with the same hunger Winston shows? Not just books, but the world around us? And when we are tired, frightened, or overwhelmed, will we still have the courage to hold truth in our hands, even if no one else sees it? In 1984, Orwell has given us a warning. But in Winston's exhaustion, his longing, and his moments of quiet resistance, he also offers a fragile hope that truth, though buried, can still be found if we dare to look. In this section of 1984, the narrative delves deep into the philosophy and mechanics of perpetual war as understood through the lens of Emmanuel Goldstein's forbidden book, The Theory and Practice of Oligarchical Collectivism. Winston reads this text in a rare moment of solitude and safety, absorbing revelations that both unsettle and clarify the dystopian structure that governs his world. Goldstein's writings begin by exposing the true nature of the ongoing war. Although alliances shift, Eurasia becomes the enemy, Eastasia the ally, and vice versa, the war itself never ceases. Goldstein asserts it is always the same war. This is not a conflict that can ever be won or lost. The three superstates, Oceania, Eurasia, and Eastasia, are so evenly matched and geographically fortified that none can decisively conquer the others. This strategic deadlock ensures a constant state of war without resolution. The first key revelation is that modern war is not fought to be won. It exists as a mechanism for maintaining societal control. The shifting alliances are illusions orchestrated by the ruling party to manipulate public perception. The average citizen is not meant to understand these shifts. They are simply to accept them. The phrase Oceania has always been at war with Eastasia becomes both a directive and a historical rewrite. Through the mechanism of doublethink, contradictions are not only accepted but required for survival. Goldstein highlights that war is no longer about territory or resources. Although disputed areas, such as parts of Africa, the Middle East, and Southeast Asia, are fought over and contain valuable labor and minerals, the war's true function is economic and psychological. In an age where machine production could satisfy all basic human needs, the ruling elite must find a way to prevent wealth from leading to social leveling. The paradox is this: the world has the capability to eliminate poverty, but poverty is essential for the preservation of hierarchy. Thus, war becomes a tool to consume surplus goods and prevent the equal distribution of wealth. The war effort eats up labor, time, and resources that would otherwise uplift the living standard of the masses. Winston reads of floating fortresses, massive war machines built not for effectiveness, but to consume vast amounts of human effort and material, only to be scrapped and rebuilt again. This wastefulness is deliberate, not an error, but a feature of the system. Goldstein writes that the essential act of war is destruction, and this includes not just physical goods, but human potential. Continuous war ensures that society remains in a state of scarcity, which justifies strict party control and suppresses any seeds of independent thought. Even favored party members live on the edge of comfort. Scarcity amplifies privilege, and privilege ensures loyalty to the ruling caste. Another profound observation is the psychological manipulation war enables. War hysteria cultivates blind nationalism, hatred, and submission. The party requires citizens who are fanatically loyal, not because they are well-informed, but because they are afraid, angry, and dependent. The lower one goes down the hierarchy, the more irrational the belief in the party's infallibility. Members of the inner party may privately suspect that the war is fake or irrelevant, but through doublethink, they simultaneously know it is real. The section then expands into a broader critique of technological stagnation. Contrary to the earlier 20th century vision of relentless scientific progress, the world in 1984 has regressed. Innovation is no longer encouraged except in tools of surveillance and warfare. Books are written by machines, fields are plowed by horses, and any technology that could liberate people or increase leisure is discouraged. The party fears knowledge that is not under its control. Science in its old sense, curiosity-driven, empirical, and liberating, no longer exists. In Newspeak, there is no word for science. All research is directed toward two goals: to better detect human thought and to destroy human life more efficiently. Scientists now resemble interrogators, dissecting facial expressions, testing drugs, developing mind control, or building weapons of immense cruelty. Yet despite these horrifying advancements, no superstate gains dominance. The balance remains. The atomic bomb, invented in the 1940s, is already the most potent weapon, yet it is never used again. Each power stockpiles them not for victory, but for the illusion of supremacy. No military risk is taken, no large offensive is launched. The goal is not to win, but to maintain an eternal, self-perpetuating war machine. At its core, the party understands this paradox. Goldstein points out that war is peace because war maintains internal peace, social stasis. War is not about defeating an enemy, but about controlling one's own population. The perpetual war keeps people too tired, too hungry, and too misinformed to rebel. In the past, military defeat meant destruction of one system, but in this dystopia where no superstate can be conquered, war becomes theater, a justification for tyranny. As Winston absorbs this knowledge, the bitter irony becomes clear. The party's ability to rewrite the past and manipulate the present has rendered truth meaningless. What matters is not what actually happened, but what the party says happened. Reality exists in the human mind and nowhere else, Winston will later think. And if all minds agree that Oceania has always been at war with Eastasia, then it becomes the truth. The deeper message is chilling. Even knowledge of the truth of the manipulation does not grant power. Winston reads with a desperate hope that knowing the mechanisms of control might help him overthrow them. But understanding is not enough. The party has designed a system where even rebellion is anticipated, absorbed, and redirected. The Brotherhood itself may be just another fiction. The chapter ends not with triumph, but with a sense of claustrophobic inevitability. The world is locked in a pattern not by accident, but by design. Poverty, war, and ignorance are no longer symptoms of failure, but instruments of stability. Through war, the party ensures peace, its own peace, the peace of unchallenged dominion. In the imagined yet unsettlingly plausible world of 1984, George Orwell dismantles the romantic illusion of war as a heroic endeavor. He does not merely expose its brutality, he redefines its essence. The reader is presented not with a tale of soldiers or battlefields, but a chilling system where war is eternal, not for victory, not for peace, but for control. To understand the nature of the present war, one must realize in the first place that it is impossible for it to be decisive. With this line, Orwell shatters any lingering belief in war as a means to resolution. In his world, the conflict never ends because its purpose is its own perpetuation. The superstates of Oceania, Eurasia, and Eastasia are not at war to dominate one another, but to preserve the illusion of threat, an illusion that keeps the public in fear and the party in power. This is a war without fronts. The real battleground is not on the edges of continents, but in the minds and spirits of the people. The disputed territories, stretching from Tangier to Hong Kong, are not fought over because of their minerals or their land, though Orwell acknowledges these are present. The true prize is human labor, stripped of dignity, transformed into an engine that feeds a machine designed not to produce wealth, but to consume it. The inhabitants of these areas are expended like so much coal or oil, he writes, not people, resources, fuel. Yet even this labor is not essential to the world economy. Orwell notes with cold clarity, they add nothing to the wealth of the world. Everything they produce is funneled back into the war effort. These enslaved masses do not build a better future. They accelerate destruction. Their toil keeps the world locked in a cycle of exhaustion and fear. The war exists to keep people too busy, too frightened, and too hungry to ask questions. This leads to a sorrowful meditation embedded beneath the political narrative. What happened to progress? Orwell evokes the dreams of the early 20th century, a time when humanity believed in a future shaped by science, prosperity, and peace. A glittering antiseptic world of glass and steel and snow-white concrete was once within sight, but that future never arrived. Why? Not because the tools failed, not because human beings lost their ingenuity, but because the ruling powers refused to allow it. Orwell shows that the machine, the very symbol of industrial hope, was hijacked. Instead of lifting humanity, it was redirected to preserve the hierarchy. Hunger, overwork, dirt, illiteracy, and disease could have been eliminated within a few generations, he explains. But that would have created a world where people no longer feared, no longer submitted. And so the machine was turned into a tool of oppression. The tragedy is not merely that poverty remains, it is that poverty is manufactured. Orwell makes this point with brutal precision. A hierarchical society was only possible on a basis of poverty and ignorance. The goal is not to elevate all, but to maintain difference. If people are too comfortable, they start to think. If they think, they challenge power. And so war ensures scarcity. Scarcity breeds dependence. Dependence guarantees obedience. Even luxury is weaponized. The inner party enjoys slightly better food, slightly finer clothes, slightly more space. Orwell writes that even the favored groups are kept near the brink of hardship. The intent is not comfort, but contrast. A lump of horse flesh becomes a symbol of wealth. A warm room becomes a reward for loyalty. The system is rigged not for abundance, but for a comparison. Each layer of society looking down upon the one below, fearful of falling, desperate to rise. Here, Orwell's analysis shifts from economics to psychology. He reveals that war serves not just to destroy goods, but to shape minds. What is concerned here is not the morale of the masses, but the morale of the party itself. Members of the party must be kept in a state of emotional manipulation, simultaneously terrified, fanatical, obedient, and proud. To maintain this, they must believe in the war, and they must believe it is just. Enter the concept of doublethink. With doublethink, Orwell introduces one of the most terrifying tools of totalitarianism, the ability to hold two contradictory beliefs simultaneously. The party member knows the war is staged, fabricated, perhaps not even occurring in the way it is told. And yet, he also believes fervently that the war is real and that victory is inevitable. It is not hypocrisy. It is faith constructed through psychological engineering. In this environment, truth no longer exists as an objective reality. Facts are shaped by the needs of the state. Language is rewritten. Science is dismantled. In Newspeak, there is no word for science, Orwell writes. The empirical method, the heart of all human discovery, is not only discouraged, but seen as dangerous. Technology advances only where it can be used to monitor, to control, or to kill. This redefinition of progress is perhaps Orwell's most bitter insight. Laboratories, once symbols of hope and healing, become factories of death. The scientist of today is either a mixture of psychologist and inquisitor, or a chemist concerned only with the taking of life. The best minds of the age are devoted not to curing disease or exploring the stars, but to devising better ways to eliminate dissent. In the shadows of hidden laboratories, Orwell imagines experts designing rocket bombs, deadlier gases, and soluble poisons capable of destroying the vegetation of whole continents. The magnitude of this vision is overwhelming, but it is also eerily recognizable. Even in our own time, we see how the brightest minds are sometimes diverted from curing cancer to building more efficient weapons, from solving hunger to harvesting attention through manipulation. Orwell foresaw this, a world where intelligence is not valued unless it serves power. The conclusion he draws is devastating. The party does not seek to win the war. It seeks to maintain the condition of war, because only in that condition can it justify absolute authority. All that is needed is that a state of war should exist. And so the world remains trapped, not because no one can stop the war, but because no one is allowed to. Through this intricate web of political, economic, and psychological control, Orwell reveals a terrifying truth. The war is not a failure of civilization. It is the design of civilization as shaped by those in power. In this pivotal section of 1984, the reader follows Winston as he immerses himself in the forbidden text attributed to Emmanuel Goldstein, the theory and practice of oligarchical collectivism. With Julia resting beside him, Winston begins to read the most dangerous document in Oceania, a book that dares to name the mechanisms of power, inequality, and the perpetual war that defines his world. The passage reveals not only the strategy, but the psychology and economics behind endless conflict. It strips bare the illusion that war is fought for victory or defense, and instead reveals its true purpose: the preservation of the status quo and the eternal division of society. Goldstein's writings describe a world where atomic weapons exist not as instruments of conquest, but as instruments of stalemate. Though atomic bombs were first used in the 1940s and 1950s, their horror was so complete that the ruling classes of all three superstates, Oceania, Eurasia, and Eastasia, recognized that their continued use would destroy the very structures that upheld their power. Without signing treaties or uttering a word of agreement, all three nations tacitly abandoned the bomb's use, choosing instead to stockpile it in secret, always preparing for a decisive strike that never comes. War in this world has ceased to evolve. The technology of destruction, self-propelled rockets, floating fortresses, and helicopters has reached a plateau. Old weapons like tanks and rifles are still used, not because they are the most efficient, but because they sustain the illusion of combat. The large-scale, body-count-driven battles of past centuries have vanished. There are no D-Days, no Stalingrads. Instead, war is sanitized, choreographed, and geographically constrained to the same tropical and polar territories that change hands but never the global balance of power. This static state of war is no accident. None of the superstates takes actions that might result in significant territorial gain or defeat. Each follows the same strategy: encircle a rival with military bases, sign a temporary peace, lull them into security, and prepare for a sudden atomic ambush. But even this is fantasy. The balance remains, and true invasion is forbidden, not by law, but by unspoken consensus. No superstate dares cross another's cultural boundary. To do so would force either the extermination or assimilation of millions, an unmanageable logistical and ideological burden. Conquest, it turns out, is not only unnecessary, it's undesirable. More than physical borders, ideological isolation is essential. The average citizen of Oceania is forbidden from ever meeting a foreigner. Languages are kept separate, and even alliances do not include mutual understanding. If people were to realize that the enemy lived, thought, and suffered like they did, the scaffolding of hate, fear, and blind nationalism would collapse. War is not meant to destroy enemies. It is meant to sustain mythologies. The enemy must remain unknowable, monstrous, and perpetually just out of reach. Goldstein reveals a stunning truth. The lives of citizens in all three superstates are virtually identical. Oceania has Ingsoc, Eurasia has Neo-Bolshevism, and East Asia has a system translated as death worship. Though the names differ, the structure is the same. Each society is built on pyramidal hierarchy, devotion to a quasi-divine leader, suppression of individual thought, and an economy that exists only to serve endless war. The ruling classes understand this fully, yet deny it. They wage wars they know will never be won, pursue conquests they know must never be completed. In doing so, they maintain power not through domination, but through paralysis. This contradiction, pursuing world domination while ensuring war never ends, produces a new and dangerous political reality. In the past, war was a test of truth. Falsehoods and illusions collapsed when faced with the hard logic of survival. 2 + 2 could not make 5 when building a bridge or loading artillery. Accuracy mattered. Loss meant death or submission. Rulers had to temper lies with enough reality to stay in power. But in this new era, war is endless and safe. Military efficiency is irrelevant. The physical world no longer checks the delusions of the ruling elite. Science itself has become a dream. Research continues, but not to improve life or expand knowledge. It serves war and surveillance. Scientists now exist to create weapons, read faces, manipulate memory, and erase evidence. Real technological advancement has halted. Horses plow fields while telescreens monitor thought. Books are written by machines, not minds, in Nas. The only progress lies in refining control, not expanding freedom. And in this context, truth is no longer a fixed point. It bends, twists, and dissolves according to the party's needs. As Winston reads, he is struck by the weight of what he is learning. The machinery of oppression is not accidental. It is elegantly, horribly designed. The world is divided into high, middle, and low. The high wish to remain where they are. The middle seek to overthrow the high. The low dream only of equality. History is an endless cycle of rebellion and betrayal, where the middle enlists the low to seize power, only to cast them back into poverty and servitude once power is achieved. Real change never reaches the base. For the low, every revolution has been a change only in the name of their masters. Even more chilling is the rise of new ideologues, those who do not pretend to desire equality, but who openly plan for permanent hierarchy. In past revolutions, there was at least the language of justice and liberation. Now even that has vanished. The middle no longer speaks of freedom. They speak only of the mechanisms of control. All this reveals a world in which ignorance is not a byproduct, but a principle. Ignorance's strength is no longer a metaphor, it is a governing law. Continuous war allows the party to reshape reality itself. If there is no enemy, one is invented. If the facts do not fit the narrative, they are rewritten. Through doublethink, contradictions are not resolved but embraced. A citizen must believe that the war is real, that the enemy is evil, and that victory is always near, even if none of these things are true. In this system, rebellion is anticipated, absorbed, and neutralized. The brotherhood may exist, or it may not. The book may be genuine, or it may be a trap. Winston realizes that knowing the truth does not grant him power. The system is too complete, too self-sustaining. Its genius lies in its ability to simulate dissent, to give the illusion of opposition while crushing its consequences. Even love, curiosity, and knowledge are dangerous only insofar as they remain private. Once they become public, they are absorbed or eliminated. The section ends not with revolution, but with intimacy. As Winston finishes reading, Julia lies beside him, half asleep, barely interested. The book, which he had hoped would be a key to liberation, feels more like a confession, a revelation without remedy. The party, through war, has achieved something unprecedented, a society that fears peace more than conflict, where the future is sealed not by fate, but by design. And in that design, the individual is not only powerless, but utterly unnecessary. In the quiet intimacy of a room above Mr. Charrington's shop, Winston engages in a moment of intellectual awakening. With Julia beside him, half asleep but content, he begins to read aloud from the book he believes will explain everything, The Forbidden Manifesto by Emmanuel Goldstein. What unfolds through these pages is not merely a criticism of the party, but a searing dissection of the entire machinery of perpetual war, power, and the architecture of oppression that sustains it. Orwell's brilliance, layered in precise and unrelenting prose, unfolds with frightening clarity. At the heart of the revelation lies a chilling fact. None of these projects ever comes anywhere near realization, and none of the three superstates ever gains a significant lead on the others. This line unveils the essence of stalemate, deliberate, engineered equilibrium. Each superstate possesses immense power, particularly the atomic bomb, which has long existed and proven its capacity to end civilizations. And yet, these weapons are never used. This is not restraint born of ethics, but of self-preservation. The ruling elite understand that total war would mean the annihilation of the very structures they depend on. And so, the bombs wait, not for war, but for illusion. What follows is the paradox of progress. Although advancements in warfare technology continue, floating fortresses, self-propelled rockets, expanded use of helicopters, the art of war has become stagnant. The rifle, the tank, the submarine, even the hand grenade remain tools of choice. The scale of bloodshed is subdued, not because humanity has become less violent, but because war now serves a different purpose, to maintain structure, not to defeat an enemy. There is no incentive for risk. None of the three superstates ever attempts any maneuver which involves the risk of serious defeat. War is managed like a performance. Its goal is not outcome, but continuity. Here, Orwell reveals the transformation of war from a physical confrontation into a psychological and economic ritual. War is no longer about territory. It is about maintaining an eternal enemy, a perpetual reason for hardship, sacrifice, and obedience. The plan of each superstate to eventually surround and annihilate another is a mere daydream, impossible of realization. Victory is neither possible nor desirable. Conflict, carefully curated and geographically contained, becomes the lubricant of a machine that demands constant motion to justify its own existence. And so, fighting is confined to disputed zones near the equator and the poles. The main borders remain untouched, not because they are invulnerable, but because their sanctity protects cultural isolation. The main frontiers must never be crossed by anything except bombs. This principle preserves ideological purity. True contact with foreign citizens, foreign languages, or foreign cultures would shatter the carefully constructed mythologies of difference. If an Oceanian were to meet a Eurasian and discover mutual humanity, the whole apparatus of fear would dissolve. This leads to one of Orwell's most quietly devastating insights. Under this lies a fact never mentioned aloud, that the conditions of life in all three superstates are very much the same. The philosophies have different names: Ingsoc, Neo-Bolshevism, death worship, but the structure is identical. Each is ruled by a small elite, worships an almost divine leader, enforces endless labor, and sustains war as a permanent state. The citizen is indoctrinated to hate what he does not know, and to love what diminishes him. This shared illusion of ideological difference conceals a deeper truth. The three superstates depend on one another. So long as they remain in conflict, They prop one another up, like three sheaves of corn. War is not the failure of diplomacy, it is the architecture of order. The fear, hatred, and loyalty evoked by war keep each regime intact. The people suffer, yet they obey. The party is simultaneously aware of the charade and blindly devoted to it. This is the miracle of doublethink, knowing that the war is fake, but believing in it with religious fervor. Here, Orwell speaks not only of a dystopian future, but of the enduring psychology of power. In past ages, war had a purpose, often bloody, but real. It ended with conquest or surrender, and through war, people remained tethered to the truth of physical reality. In philosophy, or religion, or ethics, or politics, 2 and 2 might make 5. But when one was designing a gun or an aeroplane, they had to make 4. In war, lies could cost lives. Accuracy was essential, and thus illusions were limited. Rulers could be brutal, but they could not be foolish. But now, when war becomes literally continuous, it also ceases to be dangerous. There is no longer military necessity. Efficiency itself fades into irrelevance. Technical innovation is no longer measured by utility, but by its symbolic contribution to control. Science becomes a theater of cruelty or surveillance. Laboratories produce devices to detect thoughts, spread fear, or obliterate memory, not to heal, uplift, or enlighten. The truth is not just suppressed, it is rendered unnecessary. This reality is best captured when Orwell notes, "Nothing is efficient in Oceania except the thought police." While the rest of the nation stagnates in technological inertia, the thought police thrive in precision and omnipresence. This is telling. The state's investment in control surpasses its investment in life. Human advancement is not just halted, it is reversed, repurposed into mechanisms of indoctrination. Orwell returns to the cyclical nature of history in the next chapter, where Winston reads, "Throughout recorded time, there have been 3 kinds of people in the world: the high, the middle, and the low. This eternal triangle persists through all ages. The high aim to remain where they are. The middle seek to overthrow them. The low, crushed by toil, occasionally rise only to be betrayed." History, then, is not progress. It is repetition. And yet there is something tragically beautiful in Winston's voice when he reads aloud, his fingers resting on the pages of a book that may never liberate him. Julia listens, half asleep, not fully grasping the magnitude of the words. The world outside continues, singing, washing, scraping boots, unaware of the truth unraveling in a quiet upstairs room. The party has designed a system where even revelation is powerless. Knowing the truth is not enough to change the truth. The philosophy of the ruling elite has evolved. They no longer even pretend to desire freedom or equality. Orwell describes the new middle class who, in effect, proclaimed their tyranny beforehand. In the past, revolutions were cloaked in the language of justice. Now, injustice marches openly, unashamed. The cycle of history continues, but with a cynical twist. Ideals are discarded. Control is all that matters. The great lie of the system is its claim to inevitability. By enforcing the belief that history always repeats itself, that the low will never rise, that revolutions are simply masks for new tyrannies, the party drains its citizens of hope. No historic change has ever meant much more than a change in the name of their masters. These words are not just a commentary, they are a surrender, a lament for a future that has been stolen before it could be imagined. Among the most unsettling aspects of Orwell's portrayal is the redefinition of truth itself. The party's ability to dictate reality is epitomized by the chilling assertion, "In philosophy or religion or ethics or politics, 2 and 2 might make 5. The meaning is clear. Under totalitarian control, even the laws of logic can be rewritten. When power becomes the sole arbiter of truth, Reason is no longer a tool of liberation, but a hostage of ideology. Winston's quiet reading of the line, "Ignorance is strength," becomes more than a party slogan. It becomes a mirror of a broken society. Strength does not arise from knowledge, collaboration, or compassion. It is born of blindness, cultivated ignorance, and the erasure of critical thought. In this world, the less you question, the more obedient you are. The more you forget, the safer you become. The strength of the party depends on the weakness of the individual mind. Even language itself is weaponized. The erasure of words, the creation of newspeak, and the simplification of expression serve one purpose: to make complex thought impossible. If one cannot name injustice, one cannot resist it. Orwell understood that totalitarianism begins not with guns, but with grammar, with the subtle pruning of vocabulary until dissent becomes linguistically unthinkable. The physical isolation between citizens of the superstates mirrors the cognitive isolation enforced within each society. Contact with foreigners is forbidden not out of security, but out of fear that empathy might bloom. The realization that the enemy is human, that their suffering mirrors one's own, would dismantle the emotional scaffolding of hate. The party knows this, and so it builds walls of language, memory, and silence. In this framework, even love becomes radical. The tender moments between Winston and Julia, their simple conversations, their shared reading, are acts of resistance. Not because they plot revolution, but because they insist on being human. They affirm affection, thought, and trust in a world designed to extinguish all three. That they whisper in bed about forbidden texts is not just narrative, it is a quiet rebellion of the soul. And finally, Orwell plants the ultimate irony, that the greatest danger to the system is not violent rebellion, but clarity. To see things as they are, to remember, to understand, to think, is to shake the foundation of the party's power. Knowledge becomes an act of faith, and memory becomes a battlefield. In such a world, the mere act of reading becomes a candle in the dark, a fragile light in the face of manufactured ignorance. The deeper message that emerges from Orwell's portrayal of perpetual war is a series of sobering insights into the nature of power, truth, and resistance. At the core lies the understanding that war is no longer a means to conquer, but to control. It is a carefully maintained illusion, its true function being not to defeat enemies, but to justify the preservation of hierarchy, to restrict contact with other cultures, and to channel collective fear outward. In this world, perpetual war sustains perpetual control. Although the superstates present themselves as ideologically distinct, Ingsoc in Oceania, Neo-Bolshevism in Eurasia, and what is called death worship in Eastasia, these differences are largely theatrical. Beneath the rhetoric, all serve the same purpose: absolute loyalty to a ruling elite, unrelenting labor, and the suppression of independent thought. Ideological differences often mask structural sameness, creating the illusion of diversity while enforcing a single oppressive reality. Orwell also reminds us that truth requires context and confrontation. Without access to foreign cultures, independent histories, or even alternative vocabularies, individuals lose the capacity to test or verify what they are told. In such a sealed society, truth becomes malleable, shaped not by facts, but by the will of those in power. What is not remembered cannot be questioned. What is not questioned cannot be resisted. This leads to another sobering realization. Progress is not inevitable. The party proves that even in an age of sophisticated machines and scientific knowledge, society can regress. When thought is suppressed, when education is reduced to slogans, even the most advanced technology becomes a tool not of liberation, but of surveillance and repression. And yet, perhaps the most dangerous tool of all is contradiction. The party survives not in spite of its logical inconsistencies, but because of them. Power persists by embracing contradiction, Doublethink, the capacity to hold two opposing beliefs at once, is not a flaw but a feature. It enables the citizen to know the war is fake, yet feel proud of imagined victories. It allows them to see the cruelty of the regime, yet love Big Brother. In such a system, cognitive dissonance is not avoided, it is institutionalized. Still, Orwell offers a quiet glimmer of defiance. Hope lies in recognition, not illusion. Winston may never escape the party's grip, but his ability to see, however briefly, that the truth exists, that it is being deliberately erased, becomes an act of spiritual resistance. The path to freedom, Orwell seems to suggest, begins not with rebellion, but with awareness. Finally, the book delivers one last reminder. Every system claims permanence until it ends. No matter how absolute a regime may appear, it is only as strong as the people's imagination allows it to be. Even the most deeply entrenched structures begin to crumble when people dare to imagine something different, when they refuse to accept that the future must look like the past. As Winston reads in silence, he finally breathes in the forbidden air of truth. But what he discovers is not just history rewritten, it's the anatomy of power itself. This is no longer about enemies or allies. It's about a system built on perpetual fear, designed to prevent rebellion before it begins. And now the question is no longer what the party hides, but whether the mind can survive knowing it. If this truth resonates with you, don't forget to like, comment, and follow this journey. In the next video, we'll dive deeper into the core doctrine of ignorance is strength and why forgetting may be the party's greatest weapon. Stay with us.